Dzień dobry Państwu.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. We start our
Nazywam się
conference. My name is
Jakub Wiech i będę miał
Jakub Wiech,
zaszczyt
and
oraz
it is my
przyjemność
honor and pleasure
prowadzić dla Państwa dzisiejsze
to
spotkanie,
chair today's meeting,
wspólną konferencję grupy
i.e.
Enea oraz
joint
United
conference
Nations
by
Global
Enea
Compact
and
Network
United
Polska,
Nations Global
Bałtyk
Compact
dla
Network
pokoleń.
Poland, Baltic dla
Szanowni
pokoleń,
Państwo,
or
w
the
ciągu
Baltic Sea for
ostatnich
generations.
kilku lat Polska
Across the
dokonała,
past few
można
years,
powiedzieć, zmiany
Poland has
wektora
effected
energetycznego.
a
Coraz
change
więcej
in the
energii
energy
dociera do nas z
vector.
północy,
Ever more
właśnie
energy
z Bałtyku.
comes to
Mamy bowiem
Poland from the
działający
north, from the
gazoport
Baltic
w
Sea, because we
Świnoujściu,
have
mamy
an
zaawansowany
active
projekt
gas
Baltic
terminal
Pipe, mamy
at
projekt
Świnoujście, also advanced Baltic
offshore
pipe
właśnie na Morzu
construction, and
Bałtyckim.
also
Mamy też
an offshore project on the Baltic
kolejnej
Sea,
jednostki
and also
odbierającej
plans
gaz skroplony LNG w Zatoce
to
Gdańskiej.
build yet another
Można
terminal
powiedzieć,
for
Bałtyk stał się
LNG
dla nas
in the Gulf of
taką
Gdańsk. So the Baltic Sea has become an energy gateway as an important route of deliveries for key commodities for the Polish economy. It bears, however, a threat to it, which is the munitions submerged or dumped at the Baltic Sea, be it conventional and chemical weapons, and also shipwrecks, which are also fueled, and such fuel leaks could be detrimental to the environment. And those pose a threat not only to the ambitious energy projects that we deliver, but also to the environment as well as to the life of vegetation and humans and animals. And we're going to talk about this in the course of this conference. I'd like to invite you to join us for the inaugural panel with Paweł Szczeszek, the chairman of the board with Enea SA. I invite Mr. Kamil Wyszkowski to join us on stage, Executive Director at United Nations Global Compact Network Poland. And I invite Ms. Anna Lutek, the Director of the Department Public Relations and Communications with Enea SA. Please take your seats. The first question of the panel is going to be addressed to Mr. Chairman, i.e., where did you get the idea for this cooperation and activity for combating any threats arising from the munitions dumped in the Baltic Sea? Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Well, the basis for this cooperation lies in our long-term plans related to broadly understood energy transformation or transition, and the direction that we've been pursuing to achieve climate neutrality, us as Enea and Poland as a state. We are going to transition the system and change the conventional and non-intermittent energy sources to intermittent energy sources, that including offshore wind power. As a business which is socially responsible, we have noticed the problem, and we would also like to be part of the solution and to speak out and support the Baltic Sea, which is a very special place for all of us, because each and every one of us will have gone to holiday on the beaches of the Baltic Sea, so it will be a fantastic memory. But the risks that have arisen following the tragedy of World War II is massive, so it's hard not to notice this issue, and that's why we would like to contribute to this project before we set out to construct wind farms offshore at the Baltic Sea. And a question to Mr. Director: what objectives would you like to achieve? What are you planning to do working together with Enea as part of the project The Baltic Sea for Generations? So I'm going to dwell on three aspects here. The first thing, 2 weeks ago at the COP in Glasgow, where as part of UN Oceans we urged so that the issue of chemical weapons as well as unexploded munitions and ordnance are removed. And also, I would like to thank Ms. Minister Anna Fotyga that we worked out such bipartisan agreement, and we have such a document now, and we can invoke this document, and we can also keep developing other developments in international diplomacy, and that's what happened at the COP in Glasgow. And also we focused on the Baltic Sea, where we have 10 states on the shores of the Baltic Sea, and we also have the HELCOM documents and of the International Maritime Organizations, which make it specific where those World War II remnants could be found. And what has been voiced by Mr. Chairman, that 76 years after the end of World War II, we still have a lot of work to do with this lamentable heritage of World War II. And also we must say that the United Nations was founded so that global conflict does not take place ever again. So that was the point of founding the United Nations in 1945, to protect humankind from such threats. And the last thing, speaking of the Baltic Sea, the catchment area, we need to also be stewards of the ecosystem, speaking of the environmental threats posed by chemical weapons, be it 40, 50 or 60,000 tons, not less than 40,000 tons. So we do have to reach an international agreement. And allow me to just invoke the resolution of the European Parliament. If it worked in the European Parliament, we should also follow the same route as the states of the Baltic Sea, which is a forum for debating such issues amongst the 10 countries that are members of it. And also the United Nations are ready to support the process so that in the decades to come, the issue is solved once and for all. So actually you bring together international cooperation, also economic plans, and also the stewardship of the environment, and also protecting wildlife and vegetation. Yes, the United Nations was founded just for the United Nations Global Compact. The point of it is to cooperate amongst governments, local governments, science and business. And the role of business is also important because it supplies the technology that allows us to retrieve such munitions. So we cannot do anything without the technology. We cannot retrieve such dumped chemicals. And it's the private sector who have it at their disposal, also the public sector. Speaking of the Polish Navy, which I would like to bring up here, and there is some capacity in their potential. And also, why is this a challenge for the United Nations? I would like to just say that as part of the international cooperation, we also care of other Baltic Sea catchment area matters, like offshore wind power, and this is where we could stabilize the security of the region by international investments, which with offshore wind power provides such opportunity. That was also debated at the Conference of the Parties in Glasgow. And it's obvious to us, but we just need to keep bringing it up and stressing the fact that we are going to play the role in this climate-friendly energy generation. Thank you very much, Mr. Director. Also, if I could just chip in here, it's yet another item of proof is that this energy transition must be directed in a reasonable manner, and it needs to be a long-term project. And that's yet another issue we need to tackle. And it may extend the length of the process, so it's yet another argument that is Fit for 55 is not too much of a stumbling block for us. And this base year, as mentioned by Mr. Kofi Annan, and also I also took part in the 55th plenarization with the late Professor Jan Szyszko, where we changed this base year, and it is my dream to make sure that this energy transition is managed in a reasonable way, and that's why we count on support because this electricity must be there, and then it must be also affordable, because too much action and too quickly may just ramp up the prices, what we've seen lately. Of course, we also need to factor in Polish specifics, which is not just infrastructural, but also the environmental conditions, and also very unusual issue, which is the chemical weapons at the bottom of the Baltic Sea. So we've learned all that. Now, allow me to ask Madam Director how it's going to work. Can you just lift the veil of secrecy on this matter? Today's meeting is the first step. We inaugurate the campaign Baltic Sea for Generations. We're going to inaugurate social media, whereby all the stakeholders can browse for content about shipwrecks and chemical weapons dumped at the Baltic Sea. And there will be an awful lot of content, and today's rich contribution of experts, scientists, and representatives of international organizations is testimony to the fact how multifaceted problem it is and how much could be found out about this issue. So I invite you all to follow those social media. But allow me just to explain why we call it the Baltic Sea for Generations. One of the four speakers has said that the Baltic Sea is a special place for all the Poles, but it's not just a point of interest for the Polish, because the Baltic Sea is not only the point of interest for the Baltic Sea states, but the entire continent, Europe, or even the world. We try to just assume a liability or responsibility for the future generations. This is not something we are responsible for, because we inherited the issue, and we need to tackle it once and for all without actually handing over this issue to our posterity. So it's a positive campaign which is supposed to move things forward further than the resolution of the European Parliament, which has been adopted owing it to the activism of Madam Anna Fotyga, MEP. But we need to keep applying pressure so that the European Union sees this issue as a priority. And we're also going to urge you to hop on the bandwagon of this campaign, because we all may contribute into something positive for the Baltic Sea. But this is something we will definitely speak about in the summary. And it's time to give up the floor to the experts, and I hope it's a fantastic discussion. Thank you very much. And just a last word of comment, as I'd like to bring up an important event which is coming next year in June 2022 in Katowice. There's going to be a global urban forum, which is an urban Davos in a way, where we're going to hold a meeting of the port towns and cities of the Baltic Sea, whereby the removal of unexploded ordnances and chemical weapons will be brought up. And I'd like to stress another thing, because it hasn't been stressed nearly enough. And I would like to give my thanks to Prime Minister Mateusz Morawiecki that in 2019 he decided to introduce Poland to the Council of Governments with the United Nations Global Compact, and Poland represents Central and Eastern Europe as the sole representative of the region. But we would also like to talk, taking the opportunity of the Global Urban Forum, inviting the Government Council, so that the matter of unexploded ordnances and chemical weapons is given more priority, not only amongst the 10 Baltic Sea states, but also to see it more broadly, because, and it could also see a CEE, which could, a trust fund, which could possibly help us to tackle the issue. If everyone keeps adding something, then perhaps I should follow suit. We are going to leave you in our part with this piece of information, that the fact is that in the Baltic Sea, and our experts are going to dwell on it, there are about 50,000 tons of chemical weapons, 500,000 tons of conventional weapons, and shipwrecks. So these are staggering amounts, quite horrendous actually, and we are going to debate how dangerous those are to the maritime ecosystem, and how dangerous those are to the life and health of humans, wildlife and vegetation. So this raising awareness factor of what type of risk it poses will be key to further debates. And again, I'd like to thank to all the partners of this event and also United Nations Global Compact who have agreed to actually launch this campaign, awareness-raising campaign. And yes, enjoy the conference. Thank you very much for the contribution to this panel. And I believe it's been reverberating in the title of this project, this relay of generations, because we can hear some tones of climate protection, but also day-to-day environment stewardship. Now I'd like to invite you to join us for another panel. But first, I'd like you to follow this animation dedicated to this project, the Baltic Sea for the generation. And thank you very much for your attention.
Morze Bałtyckie potrzebuje naszej pomocy.
Baltic Sea needs our assistance.
Na jego dnie zalegają tysiące ton broni
Thousands of
chemicznej i
tons of chemical
konwencjonalnej.
and conventional weapons are dumped.
To pozostałości po
These are
II
the
wojnie
remnants of the
światowej.
Second World War.
W bliskiej przyszłości
In
mogą
near
one
future,
zagrozić
they may
ekosystemowi,
threaten
gospodarce
the
i ludziom.
ecosystem, the economy,
Ale
and
nie
people.
muszą.
But this doesn't need
Każdy
to
z
be
nas
so.
może przyczynić się do
Every one
rozwiązania
of
tego
us can
problemu.
contribute to
Wejdź
solve
na
this problem.
www.bałtyk-dla-pokoleń.pl i podpisz petycję wzywającą do oczyszczenia Morza Bałtyckiego z toksycznej
baltic-dla-pokoleń.pl
broni
and
z
sign a
czasów
petition
wojny.
to clear up the sea from the toxic remnants of the World War II.
Ocalmy Bałtyk dla przyszłych
Let's
pokoleń.
save the Baltic Sea for future generations.
Ten sygnał, który Państwo usłyszeliście,
The signal that you've heard, it was the SOS Morse code
morza.
call for
Teraz
assistance.
zapraszam na panel
And now for the panel that will be dedicated to this challenge
na naszego morza.
of clearing up the sea bed of Baltic, and I'd like to invite our guests, Minister Anna Fotyga, European Member of Parliament, co-author of a resolution calling upon the EU to take actions to clear the Baltic Sea from World War II shipwrecks and chemical weapons.
Zapraszam pana
I'd like to invite Mr. Ambassador Krzysztof Pature, President of the Board of the International Center for Chemical Safety and Security.
I chciałbym również
And I'd like to welcome Professor Adam Cummings of the University of Edinburgh, a member of the NATO special team
Pan
on
profesor łączy się z nami zdalnie.
and an expert on sunk munitions,
Państwo, zanim przejdziemy do dyskusji,
who will be joining us remotely. Before we start with the discussion, I'd like to
wyświetlony od pana
ask
Jasina,
you
który
to
nie może niestety być dzisiaj z nami na konferencji. Chciał skierować kilka słów.
join us in listening to Minister Jacek Sasin, who couldn't be here in presence, but wished to address the members of the conference. Baltic Sea is our joint responsibility, and the issue of the chemical weapons is addressed on the European level. Today, it's important to coordinate the actions via debates, and national-owned companies such as Orlen and Enea, whom I supervise, are aware of this issue, and this is reflected in their actions. The planned social campaign, Baltic for Pokoleń, who's co-created by Enea, points to the issue of this time bomb of the chemical weapons in the Baltic Sea. The issue of clear-up will require cooperations of multiple states, scientific centers and stakeholders. It will be a long journey, but the Polish government has taken its first step and established an interministerial team for addressing the issue of dangerous substances dumped into the seabed. This team, established by Prime Minister Mateusz Morawiecki, unites the heads of key ministries, services, military, and also the voivodes of Baltic coast voivodeships. A Establishing this team is a testimony to how seriously the Polish government treats this threat. It pleases us that this issue has been also noticed by the European Parliament, which adopted a resolution calling upon the clear-up of the Baltic Sea from the shipwrecks and chemical weapons from the World War II. I'd like to use this occasion to congratulate Ms. Anna Fotyga and for her contribution. This initiative creates space for dialogue about that will enable actions for clearing up the Baltic Sea. Poland cannot be left alone to deal with this issue. It's way beyond our capabilities. Poland has been a victim of the countries who were owners of the weapons that are now dumped into the sea. Therefore, we cannot be liable for these disposal of these weapons. So this clearing effort must be a joint effort. Today's event is a very good example of an initiative for coordinating our actions. We do hope that we'll come up with financially feasible solutions. We cannot allow the fallout of armed conflicts from decades ago to become a cause for an environmental disaster today. And we know that we are responsible for the Baltic environment, and we will use all our tools to secure the Baltic Sea for future generations. I do believe that today we're just one step away from taking coordinated efforts to solve this burning issue of contamination of the Baltic seabed. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Deputy Prime Minister called us to act now. We have a ticking time bomb on the seabed. So I'd like to first start with Ms. Minister and to ask about what actions have been taken thus far and how this resolution has been received by the European Forum, and which EU states can we count on to help us solve these issues. Thank you very much for this recognition by Maritime Minister Jacek Sasin and all of you. I believe that is the entire EU Parliament that needs to be recognized. Using the capability or the ability to thread the corridors in Brussels, we've managed to use several windows of opportunity that we found. However, this situation is not all that bad. With the assistance of DG Mare, the Director General of the European Commission, our actions support much earlier in terms of the debate and research with the use of pre-accession funds. We were able to address them. This took place 20 years ago in 1997. Also, with the support, with the political support we received, we took actions under Interreg within the ChemSea project. Then we had the Daemon 2 initiatives with significant contribution from Polish scholars. I'd like to thank the entire academic milieu, an international milieu that we've managed to assemble in the European Parliament around this issue. I'd like to thank them for their actions. 2 weeks ago, on 17th of November in Brussels, we organized an international conference, albeit in a hybrid form, hosted by me and Mr. Kosma Złotowski, MEP, and with the support of our Belgian colleague, although who is Burkina Faso born, and who, in spite of Burkina Faso being landlocked country, is very much committed to the environmental issues of the seas, and she coordinates efforts of her fellow MEPs for that purpose. This interest of scholars and their enthusiasm has been supported by numerous representatives of EU and member states, and the resolutions has gained massive support and has been signed by representatives of all, from the entire political spectrum of the European Union, and we're very pleased to see that. The conference that I mentioned has also allowed us to secure a highly active contribution of the Council of the Baltic Sea States, mentioned by Professor Wyszkowski, and this gives us a wide opportunity to act. The Secretariat, located in Stockholm, is headed by Mr. Ambassador Grzegorz Marek Poznański, a seasoned diplomat who also joined us in our event. So I'm happy to have Professor Cumming in this panel because these actions are already under debate and political decisions. The states that are involved in the debate on EU or UN level have chosen to take actions. And this Council of the Baltic Sea is definitely an institution that not only hosts the debate but also manages the activities. Let us remind that on the Baltic seabed we have this massive and not entirely assessed a huge number of mines and minefields, which present another threat, and minesweeping activities are NATO activities that are carried out by our allies, the states of Northern Europe, predominantly. We're optimists. During our conference, we had a delivery of Sinkiewicz's, apart from Prime Minister Jacek Sasin, who declared commitment to actions. Before, we also had a declaration from Ms. Ursula von der Leyen about additional funding, and also DG Mare and its respective units have been constantly and actively involved in all the debates of the conference. It's not an easy task, and lobbying on the EU level is challenging, but nonetheless it's possible. And I'm grateful also to the board of Enea and my collaborators for all the initiatives. I believe I should mention that in the business panel, Enea was represented also. So I do hope that this Polish coherent voice and commitment of the academia, and here again I'd like to thank Professor Bełdowski, whose activity in this field has been invaluable. And I do believe that jointly we will manage to secure a progress in the field. Thank you, Minister.
Teraz chciałbym zwrócić się do pana
And now I'd like to ask President Pature. Ms. Minister mentioned that not all threats have been diagnosed, but I believe I see a Mendeleev's chart on your bow tie. So I'd like to ask you, what can we do with all these elements from this periodic table that are in the Baltic Sea? What can we do about them? So it's a great question, and please allow me to answer. I'd refer first to what Ms. Minister said. This resolution is of fundamental importance. For the very first time, it has declared that the overarching objective is to retrieve the munitions. What's the most dangerous substance in the Baltic Sea? It's arsenic. In my opinion, and looking at what we have here, these are the so-called Clarks, that are compounds of multiple chemical substances, and some of them do contain arsen, which is the most dangerous substance, as unlike other types of weapon, they do not form lumps. They are soluble, and they do affect human genome. And research carried out in other parts of the world showed that once arsen penetrates into the water, the results are life-threatening. So it is by far the most dangerous substance. Now, back to the issue of the conference. This matter has been at the center of our attention for years. The first conference was organized in 1994 with the Naval Academy, and the first publication was prepared by the Polish Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the Polish Navy. And since then, we've been actively pursuing this issue, and when Ms. Fotyga was the Minister of Foreign Affairs, we've taken a series of serious efforts, among others on the UN forum, when the UN has taken a special resolution that was written by us and our Lithuanian partners. It was an unusual resolution because we've shifted the paradigm of around this issue. The fundamental problem with the chemical munitions dumped into Baltic Sea, for us, it's a security policy issue. It's a huge difficulty to approach this issue in this way, because this limits the possibilities to approach this matter. Professor Bełdowski, when he started his career on various side events as a PhD, he was a person who showed the actual threat entailed by these weapons. He would show cods that were disfigured by these weapons. He would show research, but no one would want to approach this issue because it was chemical weapons. It could be possibly taken over by terrorists. So this issue for years has been a massive burden for us, and we do need to change the approach. It's not a security issue, it's not a political matter, it's not a disarmament matter. This chemical weapons has no significance as a weapon. It's a health issue, it's an environmental issue, it's an economic issue. And we need commitment, because this issue will be a serious hindrance to economic activities in the Baltic Sea. I've been following this matter for decades now, and the European Commission would often block the resolution to this problem because they were afraid of security matters related to Baltic Sea. We've carried out multiple research in studies in Africa, in Asia, and 51 states globally have declared having issues with chemical weapons. And the main obstacle to solve this problem for years was the EU, because the EU would see this issue as a political and security matter. Today, this problem isn't seen as such. And I do believe that this resolution, and please allow me to address Mr. again, is absolutely crucial because today the world knows about this matter and knows what to do. But for many years, we've been blocked from taking real actions. In the last several years, together with Professor Bełdowski and the Polish Naval Academy, we've prepared two marvelous projects for the EU. And the last one connected countries from Baltic, Adriatic, and Black Sea. And we didn't secure this project because this problem is not sufficiently substantial in environmental or health terms. It is still a security matter. Therefore, what I want to say is that we need to change our perception of the dumped chemical warfare agents. Today, chemical weapons are, for instance, recovered in Washington area, and no one there sees it as a weapons issue. In Japan, similar actions are taken. Everywhere else, there is matter, or in China, for matter, there are huge quantities of these substances, and they are seen as an economic and health issue. Yesterday, I came back from Hague, and Ukraine was one of the key speakers who declared that around Crimea, the chemical weapons are dumped, and demanded that Russia solves this issue. So we should launch two processes, and the state's commitment will be very important. First, we need to abandon this point of perspective which sees chemical weapons as a political or security matter, and we need to translate this problem to the health issues, to environmental issues. That's the first process. And this change in perspective will allow to secure the commitment from international committee, from NGOs, because today people are afraid of this. Whatever we manage to recover needs to be approached, and it today is seen as weapons. And the legislation is clear. Only the Ministry of Defense may take actions. We need special services for that, special units, and this entails huge costs. Some time ago, one of the harbors recovered a missile, and they asked, what do we do about it? And Navy was called in, and they had to shut down the harbor for 2 days. So the second point of attention, which is very fundamental, I'd say, is getting the massive stakeholder approach, the civic society's commitment, who will see this matter from this standpoint of saving the Baltic Sea for future generations from all threats, but not from the threats to security, which simply are non-existent.
Thank you very much, Mr. Professor. This is an exciting approach because it alters this intuitive perception of this matter, because when we speak of chemical weapons, this military and security aspect seems to be dominating the discourse. Yes, it's fundamentally important. I believe His Excellency, Mr. Ambassador, has actually shaped up this matter perfectly from the point of view of us who function from within the EU. There's yet another aspect, that Poland was a victim of World War II, one of the major ones. And if we assume this optics, as brought up by His Excellency Ambassador, we deal with an EU competency, and we need to assign funds in a different manner to it. And speaking of it from the security point of view, it's not just a matter of competencies of the Minister of National Defense, but also a competency, the financial competency of an ally and a member state of the European Union. So it's of fundamental importance of who pays the bill, actually, just to put it cynically. Thank you very much. And allow me just to chip in with another matter. Just after the conference with the Madam Minister in Brussels, which really made an impact, I was also approached so that I forward the links to this conference to other parts of the world, because this issue was debated in a holistic matter, which hadn't been done until then. And I just spoke openly that, Mr. Director, I'm convinced that if we don't deal with this issue as this matter of security, you will soon get guidelines from Brussels which will halt any activity in this part of the Baltic Sea. And I've been consulted via my foundation and my colleague experts, and we've worked with people from all over the world, and we've been approached with a query if building offshore funds is not a threat for the ecology of the Baltic Sea, because there are chemical weapons dumped. And it's a vicious circle, so it's an issue which was created for us, before us, will be more of an issue if we keep this aspect of security and politics for actually marking out some limitations, because when Nord Stream was constructed, no one, I believe, Madam Minister Fotyga then demanded, or actually just asked for some expert advice of what threats Nord Stream could pose. And for Nord Stream, there were no reservations for such dumped munitions, but for offshore wind farms or any other forms of economic activity, such reservations will just show up, and they have been showing up, strangely enough. So do believe me that this resolution, I'm familiar with the activity of the European Parliament, and I've seen many avoid resolution because they had very little of this calling to action aspect to them. But now we see that new limitations are appearing, and I believe we need to move on to the United Nations Forum. And Mr. Wyszkowski has done a great work just to see this part of climate security. And he'll be able to tell you that climate change also affects the fact that the seabed is less stable, so ever more such substances are going to be released into seawater. So I believe Poland should engage in strong action to implement this resolution and the requirements of the European Union to change the optics for this issue, to see it as an ecological, economic, health and environmental issue, and also to allocate reasonable funds to it. Thank you very much. It needs to be sounded. It needs to sound out that we've got actually 2 Nord Stream pipelines now, 4 threads of those. So it's also a major threat to the stability. Yes, but it has been concluded, hasn't it, this investment? Now, we could also try to do something about the certification. I believe it has been halted by the German regulator.
From this perspective, with the take of Professor Cumming, and I would like to ask you, Professor, because we heard that we should not look at the issue of ammunition on the seabed of Baltic Sea through the perspective of a military issue, that we should change the take on that. But how can we fit the structures of NATO in that problem? Can NATO play a role in solving this problem with this ammunition? Because we are used to think of NATO as a military structure, as something that guarantees our military security. So what's the role of NATO in solving this Baltic issue?
Okay. Well, NATO contains both the military structure and the non-military. And specifically, there is a science and technology organization which is intended to coordinate and develop technology to support NATO nations. Applied vehicle technology is one of the panels in there, and within that, I co-chair a technology group on disposal and impact of munitions underwater. These are conventional munitions, not the chemical munitions. That's handled elsewhere. And the conventional one is a significant part, and enough information is missing to deal with that. This came out of a workshop that was held in the Black Sea at Varna, and we proposed the programme, which is due to report at the end of next year, to examine the assessment of impact, provide advice to NATO members, and also those linked to NATO, looking at gaps, the available technology, the risks associated with those munitions, and remember that most chemical munitions have an explosive in place in order to generate the effect. So there is something of a security issue, but I do agree it is much more to do with the environment and health issues. One of the intentions was to draw together communities across NATO members and those just outside NATO, such as Switzerland, who are an active part of this programme. Yes, they are landlocked, but they have a problem with munitions that have been dumped in Swiss lakes, and they're trying to work out how to identify them, how to remove them safely and dispose of them without causing problems for the populations. And that's a common issue. The Baltic is one of the best assessed, and I've had one of the members of the panel that I co-chair is Professor Baldowski. And as we have worked through that with people from the Black Sea, Bulgaria, Romania, and also Norway, UK, and elsewhere, we have understood that there's a great deal of commonality. There's expertise that can be brought from studies in the Baltic and applied elsewhere. There are studies that can be looked at elsewhere and applied in the Baltic, so that we all benefit. And I was very pleased to hear mention both of Demon, which I'm aware of and has been reported to us, and the discussions within the group that have produced the link that has already been referred to, including the Adriatic and the Black Sea, because the NATO Marine Research Establishment is also a part of supporting the technology group. We also have a link with another part of NATO, which is the Ammunition Safety Group. This is a group that provides procedures for managing risk and disposal of munitions, so the actual safety part of it. One of the things, therefore, that NATO can bring to the discussion are experts on munition safety, experts on risks that have to be managed. One example, and I've had a discussion with my own MP here in the UK, is dealing with the development of wind farms off the shores of Great Britain. And there are so many things that are either wrecks from battles or from dumping that need to be, the risks need to be understood, they need to be managed, and technology available to deal with that safely and with the minimum environmental impact. And that includes the impact on fish and other marine animals. So there is a far greater level of exploitation in the civil field. And yes, I agree, this was seen as a defence issue and therefore slightly peripheral. And I believe that that is changing COP26 has some impact on the basic assumptions and how you approach that. So what we aim to do is to coordinate NATO and non-NATO activities so that the information is available, for example, from the United States Strategic Environment Research and Development Program, which has invested a lot of time and effort on fairly high-tech solutions, but nevertheless the sort of understanding and capability that is essential for being applied elsewhere. That also has to include an awareness of the difference in the hydrogeology between the Black Sea, which is warm, a two-phase system with anaerobic lower levels, which prevent some of the decomposition processes, the Baltic, which is fairly landlocked and reduced salinity, the North Sea, which tends to be rather wilder and more exciting, but has an awful lot of material round the coasts and into the Norwegian fjords, for example, and covering a lot of the continental shelf. The effect means that there are differences in some of the processes, for example, corrosion. Now, in order to do what we've just been talking about, you actually have to understand the risks and have the tools to manage them, and also make sure that you are actually taking account of what happens when you find something. Mines are a problem. We get them washed up in the UK, they're washed up elsewhere, and they need to be dealt with. Some of the tools that are available for that are effective, but they're not exactly the most environmentally friendly approach. There are other methods. There are also the issues of dealing with major sea dumping areas. The one in the UK, which is off the west coast of Scotland, and that has a large quantity of material there, because when they were dumped, that was believed to be the best solution. That solution was wrong, and some of those materials come back in one form or another. That assumption informs some of the background, and it is clear to all of us involved in the technology group that the assumptions that it was, shall we say, out of sight and therefore out of mind drove a lot of the assumptions. We don't need to bother about that. It's there, it's gone, it doesn't affect us. And then things come back. And they've been coming back more regularly, as was mentioned, in terms of things washing up, things breaking down, and the impact on the marine populations. There's a very good study from one of the groups in our technology group who are working on that in Kiel, so that there's an understanding of the damage and therefore of the priority that needs to be imposed. And that means more than just individual countries, more than the EU, more than NATO, but all have a part, because it has to be taken as something that is global in its assessment. So what we are trying to do is review, provide expert advice, possibly a best practice handbook from our NATO perspective, and the support of a NATO-wide cadre of experts, which would support Baltic work, draw and act as a conduit, so that information that is produced is shared, criticised, reviewed, and I've contributed to for example, the HELCOM manual on that part of it for some of the assessments and the approaches to managing these issues, so that we end up with a clear way forward. And I would add, finally, that we are going to find more things, and nature being what it is, if you solve one problem, as they thought they did with sea dumping, you find others appear, and that those need to be assessed and dealt with. And if we do it correctly, we have a technical expertise to support that, but we also need the political will to support it, because it is, as I said, a global issue and one that needs to be properly assessed. Otherwise, things will continue to come back and haunt us. As I say, we are due to report by December next year. What we may do after that, and I wouldn't want to do more than suggest it, is what we may have is a NATO workshop to explore where we go, what we do next, and to draw in the sort of things like Damon, etc., so that we actually contribute to that global discussion and that global policy development. Thank you.
Dziękuję raz jeszcze.
Thank you once more. Mr. Minister, we've heard what Professor said about this aggregating role of NATO in terms of generating interest in this matter among various societies and communities. Can Poland be a leader in this aspect, at least in Europe, on solving the issue of dumped munitions in Baltic Seabed? And can we thus strengthen collaboration with other countries involved in solving this matter? I do believe that this is not an issue of the position that we assume or wish to assume. I believe that we've managed to arrive at a breakthrough point thanks to the commitment of multiple parties, and I believe this is the right time to try to address this matter in a way that will yield very specific and concrete steps. Professor mentioned this extensively, but we see huge technological progress and technologies that are becoming cheaper than before. Until now, the scale was this matter that had freezing effect, because until now there was little we could do apart from diagnosing and mapping specific cases and dumping sites, be it a known location that was mapped or some unregulated one. So it was difficult to move further than that. As Ambassador Peture mentioned, there are states such as the United States and Japan and a host of other countries that are already carrying out such activities. So I believe that once the funds are deployed both globally and Europe-wide in terms for the commitment in the Baltic Sea region, this is what we'd like to pursue and what we'd like to achieve. We should move to a phase that is urged for by pretty much everyone, the scientists, enthusiasts, who often, through their own tenacity, such as Professor Bełdowski, have been involved in NATO milieus or European milieus, and also with the Polish diplomacy and the representatives of Polish Navy who participated. I'd like to thank Captain Pączek for his contribution to this conference, a very significant one. So I believe that Poland, throughout the years, has acquired not only knowledge, but also the capability to navigate various structures and I want to praise Polish-Lithuanian collaboration on the diplomatic level. It's a very significant issue. Without a doubt, this is a added value, this capability to function in multiple international structures. A question to Ambassador Pature. We've addressed some of these issues, but do we have the technical capability to solve this problem? Are there ready solutions on the table? I'd like to refer to what Professor said. Poland was one of the initiators. Once Poland joined the NATO, we very much from the start presented this issue, and I'm happy to hear what Professor said, that the technical possibilities are available. I remember the 90s, the Russians wanted to concrete out the Baltic Seabed, and that was their solution, presented as the best method. So that's why we've came up with this first publication in 1994 jointly with the Naval Academy. But I'd like to refer to what Ms. Minister said. Ladies and gentlemen, Poland has great achievements on creating global consensus in this matter. Two institutions, the United Nations, adopted a resolution in 2009, which was co-created by Polish and Lithuanian diplomacy. In 2013, the Chemical Weapons Non-Proliferation Organization, the global body in this event, in this matter, has also adopted a resolution by consensus. So we've assembled an extremely favorable environment for action for this matter. Poland has been a leader, and Chinese, Japanese, or the United States partners do recognize that. And the resolution of the Parliament is the conclusion or the crowning of this process, and now has allowed this project to take a very definite shape. So let's neutralize and retrieve this ammunition. So the technologies and unmanned vehicle technologies in robotics offer specific solutions, but they are based on monitoring and research, often pioneering research carried out by Professor Bełdowski, because he was the first to study this matter. Also, there were a lot of skeptics as well, who saw little point in this matter. So we have the awareness that this matter is not a defense issue, it's a health environmental problem. And Professor also mentioned this problem as a defense one in the past. Now it's no longer so. So I have a very specific and concrete proposal. In Poland, we've created both technical, diplomatic and scientific potential. So Gdańsk should host an international reference center for these matters. Gdańsk should host an experts network. And I know that my colleagues from Japan, in Vice's global team, we have colleagues who were co-creators of these technologies. So our partners are ready to work with us. I see Geofusion with us, represented by Mr. Łukasz. So we do not need to be to blush about anything. But now the Polish companies often serve as subcontractors for major companies, while we could be the lead partner with all the technologies we have at our disposal in Gdańsk. So let's build a global center for solving this matter for all the states here in Gdańsk. Let's use these young scholars with great achievements. Let's use them as a foundation for a scientific network, and if Global Compact could join us as well, we could build a network of NGOs. If we do not address this issue as a military one anymore, they will come forward. There was the Green Cross of Russia who wanted to join us, but they were forbidden from taking action since Russia saw it as a military issue. So if we have such a great partner as Enea and Polish and the Prime Minister who sees this as a national interest issue, let's follow the momentum and let's create something that will last for generations. It's not just a matter to be solved overnight. So I believe that this conference and my personal presence here stems from the fact that after all these years of pursuing this issue for these 30 years, all my entire diplomatic career was linked to these matters of Baltic Sea. Is all about leaving this vicious circle of military matters and moving to environment, health issues and building Polish leadership. And now a question to Professor. What will be the major threat related to solving this matter of dumped munitions?
To some extent, there is a number of threats. One is the assumption that it's too difficult and we can leave it. I don't think that is being sustained significantly by anybody, either in the defence or civil sectors. The other is using the wrong tools or finding that it's difficult and causing an accident. There are people who believe that the only way to dispose of these things is analogous to the Russian proposal of concreting everything in, is that just blow it up, which does damage and may, for example, cause an accident, which would make it more difficult to do further things. The cost is going down for the tools that are needed. Some of those are not so readily accessible by the people who actually require them. I chaired a separate group which perhaps led to this on demilitarization and disposal, and we discovered that the people who had problems did not have access to the technology that was available, and the people that had the technology were not willing or able to share it readily for whatever reason, so there was a mismatch. I think security can be used to hide behind and to do nothing. I don't think that is acceptable. I think it can lead to a failure to use the best technology at the right time in the right place. So the biggest threat, the technology is developing, the understanding of its weaknesses and its strengths is much more secure than it was 10 years ago. I worry about, like blowing things up, the overconfidence of certain groups that they believe that they have the answer. They probably have part of the answer, but it needs to be used with care. But I have to stress, it has to be used in a controlled way so that it can prove a principle. That is one of the things, for example, that I know that Professor Jacek is doing, to try proving things, developing it, and providing the evidence that is needed to support other activities. One solution is not going to be right. For example, what works in the Baltic may not work as well in the Black Sea or in the North Sea. However, it provides a sound basis to build on, and you need to be able to build and continue to monitor. To say that something is solved means that you are actually walking away from it. I like the idea of a center. We have discussed that, and one of the suggestions that was within NATO was that it could be part or associated with the Marine Research Establishment in La Spezia on the Mediterranean. But so long as something is there, that it is open to those that need and wish to use it. And you have to also understand that NATO has a wide range of networking that includes, for example, Japan and South Korea as connected countries, so that there's no great issue in avoiding people being there. So long as it's there, it's properly funded, then we can avoid many of the problems and do the best that is possible at that time and make it better for the future. It's the biggest threat is people saying we don't do it, or it's too difficult, or we just use something simple and cause trouble.
Bardzo dziękuję. Dziękuję Państwu za podzielenie się swoją wiedzą i spostrzeżeniami.
Thank you. Thank you also, ladies and gentlemen, for sharing your knowledge and insight. And now I'd like to invite you to the following panel, which will be joined by Mr. Rüdiger Stremper, by Ms. Olga Sarma from the Mare Foundation. Mr. Stremper will be representing HELCOM, and also the panel will be chaired by Professor Jacek Bełdowski from the Polish Academy of Science.
Zapraszam panelistów.
I ask the panelists to join me on stage.
Dziękuję Państwu.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. The next panel is the threats on the Baltic seabeds and environmental alert.
Czy mamy uczestników zdalnych też?
Have we got any remote participants for this panel?
Okay.
Okay. Mr. Rüdiger Strempel represents HELCOM, and he is going to participate remotely. And also, just by means of an introduction, I'd just like to state that actually the environmental threat with the dumped chemical weapons and munitions definitely is there. But speaking of the time perspectives, or the extent of this threat, it's very difficult to assess, because we actually know the mechanisms which rule this threat, but we do not know the scale of the threat itself. So here, the research and assessment must be international in nature, as we learned in the previous panel from Professor Cumming, that the exchange of experiences amongst regions where this issue does take place is key. And it's also important that the Baltic Sea region cooperates, because the largest sites in the Baltic Sea are in the Danish or Swedish territorial waters. Hence, a major role has been played in this process by HELCOM, who set out to establish by a special group, HIM in 1993, and has been continuing the good work through Uni and now submerged. But I believe we will ask Mr. Secretary Strempel to talk you through the details.
HELCOM right now in solving the problem of munitions in the Baltic Sea?
Yes, thank you. Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you very much for having me. I would very much like to be in that fourth seat on your stage in beautiful Gdańsk, but we still have a travel ban on due to COVID, so unfortunately I couldn't join you. So indeed, thank you, Jacek, for the introduction. It is very true that this is an issue that concerns us throughout the Baltic Sea, and if we look at hazardous material or hazardous substances on the seafloor in the Baltic Sea, of course, we have to differentiate. We have, on the one hand, the munitions issue, chemical munitions or explosives, so ordnance of various kinds. But of course, we also have the object of other dangerous objects on the sea, in particular, of course, shipwrecks, but also, for instance, lost cargo, all of which can pose risks to the marine environment. They are physical obstacles, of course. At the same time, they may also be contaminated and contain substances that can seep into the environment and do seep into the environment. And then, of course, we also have one especially unsavory topic, and that is dumped waste, because up until the 1960s, there were very few regulations in place to actually counteract or to regulate the dumping of waste, industrial waste, including chemical materials, of course, and even radioactive waste in the Baltic Sea. And this was, in fact, disposed of there. And indeed, HELCOM has been addressing this issue since 1993, when we established the first group to deal with these issues. Initially, it was mostly about munitions. And so the first group was actually called ChemU, so for chemical munitions, and dealt with assessing the magnitude and the size and quality of the threat. Then in 2010, another group was established, actually, which dealt with this issue and was supposed to update the information we had. That group was called HELCOM Uni. And since 2016, we have the Submerged group, which you, Jacek, know very well, of course, because you've chaired it. And the HELCOM Submerged group deals not just with munitions issues, but also with other threats, such as wrecks and such as, for instance, lost cargo containers and waste and so on. And we are currently in the process of establishing a thematic assessment of these issues, which will consist of 2 volumes, one dedicated to munitions and one dedicated to shipwrecks, and which is supposed to be published hopefully next year. Maybe I'll leave it at that for now.
Okay, thank you very much. So the chemical munitions especially are raising a lot of public awareness, and like 10 years ago, it was a very exotic subject. I remember publishing a popular science paper in przepraszam, przejdę na polski, tak będzie prościej.
Okay, I'm gonna switch to Polish. It will be easier for the interpreter. So the public opinion have been growing ever more interested in chemical weapons and munitions for quite a time, and it's not as exotic nowadays as it used to be. I believe in the early noughties, about 2005, I published a popular science article dedicated to dumped munitions, and it just actually caused a major stir, because it was also reprinted by Agora, that the mayors of seaside towns and villages just deluged our editorial office with formal complaints that we were actually scaring the tourists away, and people were wondering whether they should holiday on the Baltic Sea anymore. Now the issue has become much more popular, and we owe it also to Mare Foundation. So we would like to hear it from you, how it shapes up now, if the people know what they deal with, or if it's still a good reason to panic, or it's a bit more knowledge-based. I hope it's much more knowledge-based these days, and thank you very much for your words of recognition. because actually, yes, MARA has been undertaking this issue for public awareness and was trying to present the issue in the most viable way and just suggesting solutions that could be actually implemented. And I would also like to see this division into two strains, because we have the aspect of chemical munitions and weapons, and we also have the issue of shipwrecks and potentially hazardous shipwrecks containing fuels in their tanks. And I was delighted to hear from Mr. Secretary that HELCOM, as part of the submerged group, just see those two aspects, so chemical munitions and shipwrecks, because both those sub-issues need different solutions to be addressed. We mostly at MARA deal with fuels and shipwrecks, and we just leave the chemical munitions issue in your well-capable hands. And as part of this campaign, we would also like to focus on fuels and shipwrecks, just to raise public awareness to the hazards and just to see that there are different hazards. And a few years ago, when we just set out to work, technology was available. It was just a matter of presenting the issue and just to see that we could actually tackle the fuel issue, irrespectively of the chemical munitions. But very often when we speak of World War II shipwrecks, there's very often also chemical munitions that needs to be neutralized before we pump out the fuel or neutralize the fuel. But in some cases, it's possible to just deal with the fuel independently. And it has been said today about the cross-ministerial team that has been established in Poland. In reply, so as a reaction to this issue, we are delighted to see the establishment of this body, which was the result of the Supreme Audit Chamber. And I will allow to say that we owe it to our media activism and speaking out about this issue by MARA Foundation, but that team was established 2 times ago and has convened twice, last October. And as far as we know, no conclusions were reached, and we just hear that no one is willing to assume liability or responsibility, because everyone speaks it's not the brief of a given ministry. And it has been said already that there needs to be a separate body established for shipwrecks and for chemical munitions, a special body which would deal only with this matter and with implementing solutions and applying methods of neutralizing this issue, because we've been debating for long enough, and I believe we're at this stage of technical advancement that we could finally implement solutions, but it cannot be a brawl between ministries, but we need to find a body that will be responsible for it. Thank you very much. Actually, we've had quite a few leaders, but we would like to see ever more Indians, actually. So lots of chiefs, few Indians. So we've got those shipwrecks, which are a separate issue. We've got the chemical munitions, and we've also got conventional munitions. And now I cross my eyes with a representative of the Naval Academy of Maritime University of Szczecin, as I believe there is a lot of mine sweeping and raids. So I believe conventional munitions must be high on your list. Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Professor, for your question. Yes, obviously. So conventional munitions. But what keeps us awake is the chemical munitions. And it's a major toothache, and we struggle with this issue. Because we must realize that we need to seek, neutralize, retrieve. And can we act selectively? Why? It's because some compounds chemical warfare materials could be fantastically neutralized by the liquid phase. Others cannot be so. And it has been brought up by His Excellency Ambassador, speaking of arsine compounds as Clarkin 1 and 2. As such, organic compounds where arson is unfortunately just like a majority of heavy elements is a refractional compound. So it cannot be biodegraded by microorganisms, and it is a major issue. Speaking of just storage, we can say two things. If this material, in the form of those chemical warfare materials, is tight, sealed in tight tanks, those could be retrieved and neutralized. The issue actually arises once such materials, excuse my coughs, such materials seep into the maritime environment. Then we are dealing with a major issue of trying to retrieve this or collect this material. It depends on the material that we deal with. Speaking of Clark 1, Clark 2 material, we speak of organic compounds with arson, and arson in organic variety likes to accumulate or build up in fish. Speaking of phosgen, we have less of a toothache because phosgen actually in the liquid phase just decomposes to CO2 and also hydrochloric acid. So it could be safe. So it depends on the compound. Yeah, I can see that you also look in the direction of chemical munitions because Bornholm is not too far from you because that's the largest site, dumping site in the Baltic Sea. And I can just say that it transpires from our studies that some of such substances have seeped into the environment, so remedy will be a long and hard process. And we can't say that this technology for retrieving or recovering and neutralizing those munitions is on the table. It's still in the closet, as if it needs to be tested, trialed, and actually matched to a specific issue we are dealing with. So even if we decide to take action tomorrow to recover such chemical munitions, it is not possible. To do it safely, it requires at least a few years of preparation, including technology trials with complete environmental monitoring, small-scaled, and only if such pilot programs are successful could we actually set out to retrieve large-scale. Speaking of the selective approach, whenever we speak of compounds, this is selective approach, and also as for the scopes and objects. The last step we took in our research was to develop a system for risk assessment, because actually not each and every bomb or missile is currently such a hazard that should be instantly retrieved and neutralized. Some of those are deep in the silt, others have just corroded out, or some are in such locations where the oxygen conditions and sea currents are so slow that they will keep corroding for another 80 years. So out of those 40,000 tons dumped on the seafloor of the Baltic Sea, perhaps it's just a few percent that require immediate action, which will significantly lower the cost. However, stage one is to seek and locate such objects and to assess them one by one, actually. And it hasn't been done to date. because monitoring projects were not aimed at it, just research projects set out to do it. And research projects start with a definition. If chemical munitions seep out, or if it can build up in fish, so we just go where there's the largest chance of this being the case. Then we run research for a year or two, but we do not have kind of a photo, a snapshot of the seafloor of the Baltic Sea. We have no idea how it is in the vast expanses of the Baltic Sea. Fantastic, and I think this selective approach is very important with those compounds. As we've said, some compounds just naturally decompose through hydrolysis into safe compounds. So we can say that some materials which seep into the environment and which decompose through hydrolysis into safe compounds could be just formally left out, which would lower the costs. But there is a very important problem, because this environment where those materials have been dumped does not cooperate really. It's difficult to run the assessments or to get any information of the compounds, speaking of the barrels in which if such materials haven't seeped into the sea, so we have no idea what's inside. So we need to act globally. Anything we find must be explored, recovered, and having been assessed what material we're dealing with must be neutralized or destructed. I fully agree, couldn't agree more. Speaking of this cooperation, it has been said already that perhaps this excellence center could be an answer to it, because so far I think the aspect of dumped munitions has been part of the Baltic strategy of the European Union, and only the Baltic strategy. We've got one project, North Sea Wrecks, dedicated to the wrecks in the North Sea, and munitions to an extent, but in the Mediterranean Sea, any projects that have been launched were financed by Italian resources, and there are no calls in the Horizon type projects to cooperate Europe-wide, not to just bring up globally. I know a lot has been done by HELCOM, and some reports have been compiled, and expert groups have also been put together by OSPAR. But I wonder if those international organizations like HELCOM, OSPAR, or the Convention for the Mediterranean Sea, if those are planning to cooperate with each other, to exchange best practices, experiences, or to put together some joint reports. And I'm asking Mr. Secretary to take this question.
Yes, thank you very much. So as you may be aware, of course, HELCOM and the other European Regional Seas Conventions do cooperate quite closely, and that, of course, refers to OSPAR, but also to the Mediterranean Sea and also to the Black Sea. So there is a lot of cooperation at various levels going on there. We do not at the moment have any particular project going on with respect to dumped munitions or any joint project. This is, of course, something that the contracting parties could envision, but at the moment, this has not taken place. It would, of course, be beneficial, but having said that, we always have to be aware, of course, that the issues do differ in the various seas, and therefore there's no one-size-fits-all solution for all four seas, and that may possibly limit the scope for cooperation. However, having said that, again, there is always room, of course, for the exchange of information, the exchange of knowledge, the exchange of best environmental practice, and so on and so forth. So I think there is a scope for that. At the moment, there is no fixed and ongoing and determined program for this.
Dziękuję bardzo.
Thank you very much. Such cooperation between the regions would be one of the conclusions presented by the submerged group. So hopefully we will be able to use it to build on and continue our actions under the convention. In general terms, international commitment is the path we should follow, be it on the European level or globally. For instance, the JPI Oceans Group, who runs Munitions in the Sea program, is a place where Polish presence should be more emphasized. Formally, we're a member of this group, but in terms of participation of its efforts, it is mainly limited to us, project members, appearing there occasionally to represent the Polish research, but we definitely could do more. I'm also happy to see the politicians involved in the dialogue, and perhaps in the Baltic, European and global forum, this cooperation will take place. I'm curious whether such institutions as Mare Foundation, and I know that WWF was the one of those that I approached, and they didn't offer a definite answer, but perhaps it would be possible to set up a network of NGOs from the Baltic region that could address this issue as a common issue for Europe, and perhaps such an initiative could be run across Europe. I believe this is a very interesting idea. It's true that currently there is very few organizations globally, not NGO organizations, that would address this issue. So perhaps for chemical munitions there would be more, but fuel in the wrecks is something that is the point of attention of just one more institution apart from ours, and it's located in Australia. It's the Major Project Foundation. It's dedicated to the issue of the fuel, and within the last 2 years they've started to implement a wreck management project in collaboration with the Australian government and Environment Secretary. So this issue is overlooked by NGOs to a large extent. I do not know why it is so. Perhaps it's because a complicated matter, there are no ready-made solutions, and the social interest and media coverage is growing, and we ourselves also try to foster international collaborations at the moment, perhaps not with other NGOs, but this is definitely something I will reconsider, but with research or governmental institutions worldwide. When we started our activities, it was much easier to find cooperation abroad than in Poland, and this exchange of information was quite extensive. As part of our collaboration, we cooperated with British Ministry of Defence, and we've used method for risk assessment, the so-called environmental risk assessment, and also using the WRACA method. And we used our experience to create our own methodology for assessing the risks for southern Baltic wrecks. In regards to the fuel, this methodology is available online and in print, so it offers practical solutions to activities in Baltic, and this is the fruit of our long international collaborations, and I'm looking forward to continue our international efforts with Estonia and Finland, Sweden, and we do hope that we'll be gaining more media coverage, and that this global compact initiative, Baltic for Generations, will contribute to the growing interest internationally. Well, I'll use this opportunity to perhaps promote our institution, and we want to present a project dedicated to wrecks and munitions, to Interreg, and to have the tools that we've used for risk assessment for munition, to adjust them for munitions. And we use the VRUM acronym, so it's Rex and Munitions risk assessment. And if we hope to have it secured starting with January next year, so this will definitely open some room for more collaboration, and I do hope that this will lead to further integration of the two groups within the submerged task force. And so we're slowly running out of time, and I'd like to go back to this Excellency Center idea. It is, so to say, assembling all the experts into a single institution who would gather the experts to work continuously and coherently on an issue represents a value in its own. I represent the Institute of Oceanography of Polish Academy of Science. The Maritime University in Szczecin also is an organization that addresses similar issues, and we can all agree that it's the gear and equipment that is the major obstacle. It's very expensive to maintain and to operate, and since our research vessels have to carry out other activities, so this equipment for munitions is used only on several occasions throughout the years, and other than that, it generates huge expenses. So if such center of excellence would become an owner of the equipment and would then make it available to scientific institutions or other organizations that are addressing this subject, but the center itself would be the owner and the caretaker of the equipment, would prove a much more simple solution. I do agree with you, Professor. Unfortunately, such research entails the necessity to cover the cost of equipment, which is exceptionally expensive, highly demanding, such as gas or liquid chromatography with proper mass detectors. So it's not the point of exchanging all the equipment, but to maintain it on a proper level. I won't refer even the calibration process or the separation of contaminants from bottom sediments. These are laboratory details. But I am inclined to believe that such a center would need to have a laboratory with specialists from a given field who could offer research in this matter. Yes, a laboratory would be very much welcome, and we would definitely need to capture someone from the Military Technology Academy in Warsaw who would offer expertise in compounds that require specific permits, because some research requires calibration, and calibration is only available to institutions with specific permits, and these permits are available only to the Military Academy of Technology in Warsaw. Another part of equipment is the maritime gear. These are sonars, these are UAVs, and such underwater robots often cost up to £8 million. So we haven't seen a grant this big, and probably it's unlikely we'll see one in the near future. So such equipment also needs to be maintained on a regular basis, which also is a costly process. It requires also specified specialists. Currently in Poland, we have 2 operators for underwater UAVs. It's just me and my colleagues, and we need 2 operators at least, as as by requirements of the insurer. So if me and my colleague cannot go and operate the machine, there is then no one else in the country. So this center could also offer a training center for such operators. So there would be a plethora of uses for this institution. So yes, there are risks. Its scale is potentially massive, but actually it remains unknown. The time scale is also undefined, and the fact that we're here today and that the politicians have become involved in the process and that HELCOM is adamant about continuing these works is perhaps a sign that the next step will be the testing of technology and perhaps first remediation efforts. Yes, Professor, I believe we need to strike a balance between the use of the equipment and its durability so that we can use it all year round in the context of the studies that we're interested in, plus it also additional studies related to maritime questions. Thank you. And with that, I also like to thank all the other panelists for this lively discussion and which offered a lot of details. And I do hope that this matter of environmental alert has been sufficiently presented. So there are no grounds for panic, but we definitely do need to take actions. Thank you very much.
Dziękuję bardzo, panie profesorze. Dziękuję.
Thank you very much, Mr. Professor, and thank you to all the panelists. And now let's have yet another discussion panel, which is on the perspective in which we should try and clean up the Baltic Sea. And the contributors are Professor Wojciech Droszcz, a professor with the University of Szczecin. Please come up on stage.
Czy pan profesor jest na sali? Tak.
Have we been joined, Mr. Professor? Yes.
Zapraszam również pana Łukasza Porzuczka,
Mr. Łukasz Porzucek, chair of the boards with Geofusion Group Poland.
Dzień dobry. Z kolei zdalnie będzie pan z zarządu Dynasafe.
Charles Diggs, the chairman of Dynasafe
Moderatora pana komandora.
And also the chair of this panel is Commander Professor Bartłomiej Pączek.
Dziękuję bardzo.
Thank you very much.
Dziękuję bardzo. Witam wszystkich.
Thank you very much, and welcome to all the speakers sitting on this panel, which I have the pleasure of chairing. Allow me to start with a quote and bridging the gap between this panel and the previous ones. For instance, His Excellency Ambassador Baturay has named the Naval Academy and also Professor Moldowski with the Institute of Oceanology of the Polish Academy of Sciences as pioneers who set out years ago to assess the role and hazards arising from the dumped munitions and shipwrecks at the seafloor of the Baltic Sea. So thank you very much for recognizing the role of the Navy Academy from the research that we've engaged in and also in the research that have been named here, Hans and Damon too. It's clear that up to a point, the issue was the retrieval and neutralizing technology. But the panel that we are opening now is dedicated to the technology itself. And I believe we can address the question which has been asked time and time again today, if we're ready to comprehensively, let's say, surface neutralization of the issue across the entire Baltic Sea, or if we are just restricted to targeted response to hazards where such hazards have been identified. And I would like to ask Mr. Chair Łukasz Bożuczak, representing a Polish business. Mr. Chairman, how it happened that we've arrived at a point in time whereby you maintain, and the business you represent, that you are ready to apply large-scale actual activity to neutralize missiles and barrels and munitions on the seafloor. It's like we didn't know it was impossible, so it has worked. And also, as a starting point, I know that everyone has thanked Professor Bełdowski, but I would like to thank to all the universities and academic institutions I've been working with, because without their contribution we couldn't have developed our system. And I'd also like to thank Professor Bełdowski, who often criticized us in a constructive manner. But how it all happened, we as a business have been dealing with conventional munitions, so we would retrieve and neutralize conventional munitions and weaponry. And actually, I realized that the market will push us to develop towards retrieving chemical munitions. So we set out to design solutions. We assessed existing technology, and we followed some established items of technology, and we know that technology as such is not like, it doesn't have to be mind-boggling. We use plasma in our neutralization process, vaporization. This is the technology which has been around for some time, but it's about the concept of the entire system. So we applied our experience in retrieving, locating, and recovering conventional munitions. And we would like to say that the solutions we offer could be deployed not across the entire Baltic Sea, because it's not a system for recovering and cleaning up sites. It has little capacity, the system. It's for targeted deployment for such investments like wind farms to secure such investments. So we, as a Polish business, have set out to preempt, let's say, eco-terrorist attacks of the entire concept of the Green Baltic Sea or the offshore wind farms, because now we know that at the sites of the future wind farm facilities, there are a few hundred tons of such munitions, but there are no large-scale sites. So our system has been designed in such a way that it could be just bought as a ship, which is 60 to 70 meters, depending on the design of the ship itself. And such a vessel could provide the services of locating, recovering, and neutralizing such munitions on board. It could also assist with emergency services, so it could be on call in a port, and if any such substance is encountered at any stage of development, such a vessel could be deployed and could recover and neutralize the hazard. And the second thing we're working on now could possibly be used to tackling the issue of large dumping sites, but we couldn't pull it off without such companies like Enea, for instance, because we are relatively a minor business. I'm proud of the fact that we've pulled it off as a Polish business, but without the support of energy champions, we couldn't actually just take over the Baltic Sea. We need to work hand in hand with other enterprises. We've achieved the level of success, but to go further, we need some more partners. So why don't we talk about partners then? Because I'm sure you've taken your cue from the businesses which have actually taken part in such operations before. And of course, as you said, technology needs to be matched to a specific case and the body of water, because operations of recovering and neutralizing will look different in the Baltic Sea or ocean waters of the Indian Ocean or the Pacific Ocean. And now, why don't I ask Mr. CEO Charles Diggs with Dynasafe from the US of your experience. If in your assessment, Mr. CEO, that your business that has got bodies of water which are very much unlike the Baltic Sea, i.e. the oceans, can it be transferred to a Baltic Sea?
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, I'd just like to thank everybody for allowing us to be here. Even though I'm located in the U.S., we are a Swedish company, so this is very close to us. I would say, to answer your question, absolutely, this can be transferred. We've put together some concepts where we've used our technology, and we're currently partnered with a Polish company, Rematowa, and I put together a concept where we put our static detonation chambers and our off-gas treatment systems on a platform. That platform could be deployed. You could have vessels that would go out, locate, find munitions, pull them up. Dynasafe specializes in not only demilitarization, but we also specialize in containment systems, so you could capture the munitions from the ocean floor, bring them up, store them. These are all things we can do. Now, of course, we can't do it alone. We have to find good partners. And I think you have a few on your panel there. We have, we would have to do, we each need to do what we're good at doing to solve the problem. But if you look at the past 30 years of what Dynasafe has done, granted, we haven't specifically taken munitions off of the ocean floor and destroyed them, but plenty of people have done UXO remediation where they pull munitions up. And then if you look at our resume of over 40 demil plants that we've deployed and successfully operated and destroyed all the stockpile of almost every known agent on the planet, transferring that technology to doing this job is very feasible and very reasonable.
Wiem, że prosił pan o możliwość przedstawienia.
I know that you've asked us to actually present the success of your business, and I believe this is the time where we could showcase what it looks like, and such photos could actually show it to our viewers what type of technology we're debating here.
Sure, I'll be glad to. So yeah, if you look at this, this is a very simplistic version of our static detonation chamber, but the beauty of this is in that first step there, once an operator puts the munition in that box, they never touch it again. So it's completely safe, it's completely automated, and there's no disassembly needed. Once it goes in that box, it automatically would go up to a loading chamber on the platform. It would be automatically pushed in. It's a double airlock, completely safe, blast-proof containment. And then in step 3, it would go into what we call loading chamber 2. It would go in there, rotate 90 degrees in a cradle, fall into this detonation chamber, and that's where it would be thermally treated. We treat it with high temperatures, and that would get rid of the chemical agent, get rid of the explosive components, and completely destroy any of those components. And then from there, of course, you can't just release those gases. We have to take that through a off-gas treatment system. We do all that in-house. We design our own off-gas treatment systems out of our German office. And we would take that, it would go through a thermal oxidizer or afterburner that would thermally treat all the waste products there. From there, we would take it through a spray dryer that would cool the gases off to be further treated. We could put scrubber systems in, wet or dry, depending on that, a baghouse filter to remove any debris, heavy metals, dust, salts, things of that nature. Take it through a moisture collection process, and then we always put a carbon filtration unit at the end as a fail-safe, just in case any organics make it through the system. All that's pulled from a draft from a set of ID fans, induction draft fans. And then you can even put additional components on there. If your environmental permitting has a NOx requirement, we could put a DNOx system. And all these pieces are completely modular. So whatever the mission is, you don't waste money by putting things you don't need in, but also make sure you have everything you need to meet whatever the regulations or requirements are for the mission that we're trying to accomplish. And then probably most importantly, at the end, you would monitor every emissions coming out of the stack real-time monitoring, making sure nothing harms the environment. So that's the concept. We feel this technology is there. And we could put it on a vessel such as this. And if you notice, this is with Remitova, a Polish company we're with. But if you put it on a vessel like this, you would deploy it. You would have a smaller vessel go out and grab the items, bring it to the aft of the ship. We would have containment vessels there in order to store the components, identify it. If needed, even larger components, you could do size reduction, water jet cutting. All these are things that Dynasafe does, and then get it into the feed boxes. And once it's in those feed boxes, it's completely safe. And all you're going to have at the end is scrap metal and clean air.
Dziękuję bardzo, panie prezesie. Zwłaszcza, że zdjęcia, które...
Thank you very much, Mr. CEO, because all the photos have showcased the scale of the installations. You have seen the installation for containment of ammunition. As Chair Bożuczek said, that plasma technology means the installations are not very small scaled. How do you see the likelihood of the installation of such objects on a floating platform? We've seen a barge with such installations deployed on it. And do we need to source such installations ready-made from the market, or do we speak of new products that need to be developed? I know that the product that has just been showcased by Dynasafe, there are also some German and Japanese solutions available. And from the talks I've had with decision makers, those are mostly onshore installations, which are very next to impossible to be deployed on vessels. How has this matter been dealt with by Geofusion? What's been said by Mr. Charles Diggs of Dynasafe is the transformation of an onshore installation on a large vessel, which is a great solution in cases where you need vast capacity. So it's great for larger sites where we can supply a lot of objects for containment. But our solution is miniature. It could be upscaled, of course, but the very installation has the length of 32 meters and the width of 12 meters. So our installation is strictly dedicated to installations where we have individual objects within the area of wind farm development. And the capacity is 100 kilograms per day of chemical agent, much less than Dynasafe offered, but it's just for this market niche, for targeted containment, for emergency action. This installation cannot in any way be used for what Dynasafe could be deployed, so for neutralization of large number of objects at a single site. That would require a larger vessel, so we haven't dealt this larger vessel issue, but we just had to scale down the installation just to scale down the costs, because we are a commercial entity that need to now conclude agreements with concessionaires who will develop wind farms. It's not about scaling down on quality, but just scaling down on the size and capacity of the installation. But when we have some entities which are sparsely located, we just couldn't supply enough objects to neutralize such objects. Yes, so we've focused on the technological aspect of the issue. But I believe all our viewers need to have it explained to them that there is a barrier in legislation and also by logistics capacity in marine or offshore containment. Speaking of legislation barrier, I can say that the current provisions of the Convention on Non-Proliferation on Chemical Munitions stipulates that if any chemical weaponry is retrieved by a member party, cannot be moved around, and nor can it be transferred to the territory of any other signatory state of the convention. So if such chemical weapons are retrieved, then these chemical warfare materials cannot be actually transferred to the territory of another signatory state. That's why it has to be contained and neutralized in situ. And also something which has been brought up by Madam Anna Fotyga, MEP, or His Excellency Ambassador Batory. So those businesses which have successfully completed some containment operations, can we still speak of active chemical munitions, or we should just treat it as toxic waste, i.e. there's waste byproduct, which opens the door to opening up this window of opportunity not to have to strictly abide by the provisions of the Convention of Non-Proliferation of Chemical Munitions and to neutralize those objects not as chemical weaponry, but as classic toxic waste, if I could just translate the provisions of the convention as such. In our assessments, we fully agree with what His Excellency Ambassador Batory says. We've heard from our experts, and we approach such chemicals as toxic waste with all the safety protocols applied, but this approach allows us to fully legally dispose of such substance after it's been recovered. And it's necessary because we cannot just now dwell on the legalese of it, because we've got some formal legal advice in support of that, but we approach it as toxic waste. Of course, it will be contained in situ, but it can be legally contained.
I'd like to ask Mr. Diggs to contribute, but I see he's disappeared. Could we please re-establish the link with Mr. Diggs? If not, I'd like our next panelist, Professor Droszcz, to take the floor. Professor, you represent two worlds. On the one hand, it's the academia. You're the head of the logistics department at the University of Szczecin. But on the other hand, the entrepreneurship world, as the member of the board of the innovation and logistics department of Enea. So is there space to merge these two aspects, because we've addressed the issue both environmental and health aspect, and on the other hand, they are the needs of enterprises. So in investments such large as creating offshore farms, is there any space for collaborations with science, and is there a room for risk assessment in regards to the dangerous substances on the seabed? Thank you for this question. Of course, science and economy should go hand in hand and should offer positive synergy effect. But thus far, we're setting our first steps in offshore investments. By 2050, the EU has estimated the number of installed power from offshore wind farms to be around 450 gigawatts, out of which the Baltic potential is 93 gigawatts. So Baltic is the second most attractive sea for offshore energy in Europe. And Poland, being the leader, could secure 80% out of this 93 gigawatts. So this is a huge challenge for our economy, but on the other hand, it's a huge developmental potential. It is estimated that the sole investment process, and thus far we have 12 investments ongoing, 2 of them have already received the connecting power conditions. So this entire process will require 34,000 FTEs and 24 later on for operating. Annual expenditure is over 1.4 billion zlotys for offshore wind power. So there is a lot at stake, so that both during the investment process and in the operations phase, no dangers from dumped munitions would threaten the operations or the investments in the wind energy. The second economic aspect that should be addressed is the seaside tourism. Let me remind that the Western Pomerania is the most frequented holiday destination in Poland. Also, the eastern seaside is popular, and seven Western Pomeranian cities are the ones to record the highest number of overnight stays in all of the Poland. So this is prior to the pandemic. These areas generated 6.2% of our GDP. Baltic is not a very clean city. It's one of the most polluted bodies of water in the world. It's not only the matter of the munitions, but also the agricultural and communal wastewaters that contribute. So any additional threat to the environment could endanger the tourism. And here is the huge responsibility of scientific institutions, the Gdańsk Technical University, the Naval Academy, and the Maritime University in Szczecin and others, is to find proper solutions and to implement them via companies represented by our panelists. And we, as a country, are capable of creating and developing such technologies. We have a huge untapped potential in Polish universities and scientific centers. As always, it's the right reorganization that it is the matters. So it's not and to properly direct the efforts of the scientists. The scientists always claim that the business doesn't want to cooperate with them, and vice versa. And the solutions are often claimed to be too much time-consuming, overly time-consuming. So as probably the truth lies halfway, I know both these worlds, and for many years the universities would operate for themselves and no one would expect them to offer any implementation proposals, or feasible solutions, such as those related to clearing up this Baltic sea floor. So the companies were forced to seek ready solutions elsewhere or generate their own. And now the time is right to use the Baltic for the next generations to mobilize the synergy, a positive one, because as we well know, there can be also a negative one, to join the academia with business activities, to join their efforts and start working together. There is hope, Professor. Last week, at the Technical University of Gdańsk, with the presence of Prime Minister, all the centers that you've mentioned and their heads have met and signed a sectoral agreement on collaboration for offshore wind farms development. Of course, these risks of dumped munitions will be addressed by this forum, but this forum also can be used for facilitating better collaboration between the entrepreneurs and the academia. Also, Professor Bełdowski mentioned the idea to create, using scientific staff, a center for analysis, for risk for hazards estimations, using similar solutions as Daemon 1 or Daemon 2, which is the decision aid solutions. So AI collecting all the data from multiple scientific processes and using it for supporting decision processes. So the entrepreneurs often want to purchase solutions off the shelves. So do you see your role as rather outsourcing for the business academy, or a solution to sever your links to the scientific stuff? This has been the situation thus far, and what we're trying to do is to change it. The Enea operator has an innovation office, which is highly active, and it runs currently 4 national research programs. We're also part of the Horizon 2020, and we do try to network our universities to facilitate implementation of homemade solutions that will support our activities, that is the high, low, and medium voltage grid. And we're also looking with growing appetite towards the Baltics and to the logistics challenges related to connecting the wind farms to our energy system. I see that we've managed to overcome the technical difficulties, and Mr. Diggs is here with us from the States. And back to the question that has been mentioned, and Mr. Diggs didn't have the opportunity to answer it. The question was about the possibilities for collaboration and involving companies such as Geofusion or Dynasafe into the logistics processes related to investments in offshore areas, especially wind generation. How would you see such a model for collaboration? Is it more of a outsourcing to such companies as yours or Geofusions, or a model of transferring these competencies to wind energy companies? I think we've lost the connection. I see. It seems that we're facing some cybernetic hiccups. So the last question, as we are slowly running out of time: what opportunities and risks do you see in regards to technologies as it is today? So please tell us about your own strong sides and weaknesses. It's a bit of a work interview question. So please answer this question in regards to the munitions stored on the seabed in Baltic Sea. So we approached the issue in the following matter. As for the munitions in the areas of wind farms, we have to solve this problem, as if we fail to address it in a controlled manner, and please bear in mind that in many articles we hear that the drums will corrode, but any day soon, but 90% of the ammunition is no longer in the drums, it is rather spilled over the seafloor. So please imagine what would happen if we would dredge a cable through such areas of concentration. So we have a methodology, but we also spend a lot on R&D, and the system is going to evolve. We draw on and build on our errors, which were costly enough. And only when collaborating with scholars and engineers will be able to grow. And in 5 years' time, we'll have better solutions at our disposal. What are the issues in collaboration between the entrepreneurs and the academia? As a representative of a business side, when you collaborate with scholars and you're a businessman, if you want to collaborate with in research, you have to expect some dead ends. We cannot order something that will be ready and functioning. R&D efforts has a lot of dead ends, and as an entrepreneur, I was very annoyed to see that we've spent 2 million zlotys on something that didn't offer much solutions. But this is natural in R&D, and business parties who want to invest in this field need to bear this in mind, and research is costly. It's not purchasing a specific car for a specific amount of money. To conclude our discussion, please allow me to use a Chinese proverb that every journey starts with a first step. And this first step in the field of technologies has been indeed taken. We have the technology that will allow us to start retrieving and disposing of chemical munitions. However, we are still not ready to approach this matter holistically, and we cannot offer to clear up the entire Baltic Sea. We need more targeted solutions reacting to specific hazards that as they appear, and specific projectiles, specific bombs at a specific site. I couldn't agree more. Even in our methodology, we have a provision that states that whenever we approach an issue, we need to cooperate with a scientific milieu. It's not cherry-picking, it's a very complex operation, and should we fail to do proper research of the field, it will have not only impact on his finance, but this could have severe consequences for the entire area. Answering your question, Professor, I believe that creativity and innovativeness of our enterprises and scholars is what we have as an asset, while the risk is the deficit of capital, which also is a burden for all growing the economies, such as the Polish one. Since gentlemen do not discuss money, I will not go into much details on the available assets because it transcends the capabilities of a single country, and cooperation on the European or NATO forum is an integral part of the debate to be able to secure proper funding. And with that, let us conclude today's meeting. Thank you for your presence. Unfortunately, due to the cybernetic issues, we couldn't have Chairman Diggs with during our entire meetings. But other than that, I'd like to thank all the panelists and audiences for being here with us. Thank you.
Dziękuję bardzo, panie profesorze.
Thank you very much, Mr. Professor. Ladies and gentlemen, that's been the last panel of this conference, so we need to summarize it. So I'd like to invite Ms. Director Lutek, who will deliver the summary of the day. Ladies and gentlemen, we are soon concluding today's event. I decided to extract the essence of each and every utterance that has been offered on the panel. So allow me just to comment first, Mr. Chairman Szczeszek. Lack of action could actually pose a threat to the Baltic Sea and also the health of persons and wildlife, and also economic ramifications to the entire Pomerania. We would like to raise awareness of the Polish and the Europeans across all ages. The Baltic is also the future of the energy sector. Wind farms are being developed there that use natural movement of air for generating energy, and even more investment plans. Enea wants to be part of it. We want to supply energy which comes from renewable energy sources, green electricity as part of the future, and we urge all those for whom the fate of the future is not unimportant. And the next voice, with Kamil Wyszkowski of Global Compact Network Poland. The chemical munitions at the Baltic Sea is ever more pressing. We would like to particularly deal with not less than 40,000 tons of chemical munitions, including sarin and mustard gas. And the adoption of the resolution to neutralize munitions and shipwrecks following World War II just showcases the importance of this issue. We need to cooperate internationally across all the states of the Baltic Sea and to engage societies, governments, local governments, business and NGO can see us work out specific solutions by the Baltic dla pokoleń or Baltic Sea for the generations. United Nations Global Compact Network Poland would like to be part of the solution and also to really shape up the solutions for this problem internationally. Yet another contribution from Anna Fotega, MEP. I believe Mr. Deputy Prime Minister Jacek Sasin, he showcased the fact that Enea with Baltic Sea Water Generation supports cross-generational initiatives. The issue of dumped munitions is an issue for everyone. Poland is part of the solution by establishing the international body for the hazards posed by the dangerous or hazardous materials dumped in the territorial waters of the Republic of Poland. And also, Madam Anna Fotega, MEP, the co-sponsor of the resolution of the European Parliament to take action to tackle munitions. Ms. MEP saw it as a success of the entire European Parliament, as she was supported by all the member states, and more action should be taken and use positive synergies offered by bodies or entities which have engaged in these actions. She named the Council of the Baltic Sea States, NATO and the United Nations. She saw the declaration of the Baltic Sea States positively, and she saw the technical advances allow us to more realistically actually forecast the costs of recovery and disposal of such chemical munitions. And yet another speaker, His Excellency Ambassador Mr. Krzysztof Baturej, believes that dealing with the issue of submerged munitions necessitates a change of optics. And to date, we spoke of political and security perspective, but should be approached as an environmental protection, health protection, and economic issue. Similar opinion was presented by Professor Adam Cumming,
Nauki I Technologii, którą kieruję, zwrócił uwagę na potrzebę patrzenia środowiskowej ochrony
NATO STO, and he also highlighted the issue of health protection, and also he spoke of technology available and risk assessments for recovering munitions from the sea, and the support for debates and actions to recover such munitions and neutralize shipwrecks. On panel 2, the speakers spoke of the threat to the economies and marine ecology, and also safety to vegetation, wildlife, and human life. Professor Jacek Brodowski stressed, as chair, the fact that it's necessary to raise awareness of the general public of the hazards arising from the munitions dumped on the seafloor of the Baltic Sea. He called for more international collaboration in submerged munitions, not only in Poland but all European countries. And he believes that Excellency Center for Dumped Munitions was a great idea, and similar ideas were voiced by other speakers.
Pan Rüdiger Strzempel, sekretarz wykonawczy Komisji Ochrony Środowiska Morskiego Bałtyku.
Secretary of HELCOM.
Konwencja o ochronie środowiska morskiego Morza Bałtyckiego została
on the protection of the Baltic Sea was signed by all the Baltic states in 1974 to tackle ever-growing environmental issues arising from human action. On one side, the legacy of World War II is chemical weapons and shipwrecks. Both these issues need a two-forked approach. And the same opinion was voiced by Olga Sarna, the chair of Mara Foundation, who mostly work on methods of pumping out fuel from shipwrecks. And she noticed that to date, not a single ministry has assumed liability or responsibility for tackling the issue. Hence, it's great to see that this cross-ministerial team has been established to offer an opportunity to tackle these issues. Mr. Professor Wojciech Koniński with the Naval Academy of Szczecin, Maritime Academy of Szczecin, focused on the pollution from chemical munitions and also the poisonous effects of some such hazardous substances, especially organic arsenic compounds, which could be accumulated by vegetation and marine organisms. And the last panel showcased what could be achieved by tackling the issue forever. It was chaired by Commander Professor Bartłomiej Pączek, the Dean of the Naval Command Operations Department of the Naval Academy in Gdynia. And allow me just to say that a journey of 1,000 miles starts with a single step. And to clean up the Baltic Sea from chemical munitions, we are technically ready to take the first step. So it's time we set out on a journey. And I just wanted to stress that the Naval Academy has been quoted as a center of technical and scientific know-how for chemical munitions dumped in the sea, be it the Baltic Sea or any other bodies of water. Moving on to Professor Wojciech Droszcz with the University of Szczecin. He is the head of Scientific Council Institute of Management Department of Logistics, University of Szczecin, and Deputy Chair for Innovation Logistics at Enea, operator, one of the entities at Enea Group. He noticed that Poland is one of the leaders for offshore wind farm energy, and it's important to facilitate as safe as possible exploitation and investment. Seaside tourism is 6% of Polish GDP, so making sure the Baltic is clean is in the interest of our national economy. Mr. Łukasz Pożółczak, the chairman of the board with Geofusion, stated that it's important that Enea supports such businesses that allows Poland to become a Baltic leader in offering solutions for recovering and neutralizing conventional and chemical weapons, because the system is so innovative that German partners would like to implement it in tackling issues in the territorial waters. I believe it was the first Polish business which was established to deal with such notion, with the issue of neutralizing. So congratulations to Mr. Chair for these efforts. And Charles Diggs, the CEO with Dynasafe, who spoke from the USA, mostly successfully, but sometimes the internet made it impossible for us, and the connection kept breaking up. But Dynasafe has got resources for retrieving and neutralizing chemical munitions, and in the presentation shown by Mr. Charles Diggs, it showed an entire process of such an installation which could possibly contain such hazards on a sea platform as opposed to on shore. So we've heard from two gentlemen who are in charge of powerful in terms of their capacity businesses. So the resources are there and we can engage in action as we know we should. And this is not the end, ladies and gentlemen.
Chciałabym, to też
I
zresztą
would just like to,
powiedziałam na samym początku
and
tego,
this is something I said at the very beginning of today's event,
abyśmy wyszli stąd nie tylko
that
uzbrojeni w nową
what we
wiedzę,
take home is not only
ale
some more
żebyśmy
knowledge,
mieli poczucie, że my,
but that
Polacy,
one of the takeaways could be this feeling that we, Poles, Europeans,
udział w
could actually take symbolically part
czy akcji, która
in
może przyczynić się do rozwiązania tego
campaign
problemu. Ja
which
tutaj
could see this problem being successfully tackled. And I would like to invite a very special guest to join me on stage.
Znana z
She's a person who you'll be familiar with from the media. Please come up on stage, and in a moment
naszej dyskusji
you will
dotyczącej
hear a brief debate. Ida Nowakowska, first and foremost. Hello and welcome.
Pani Ida Nowakowska
Ms. Ida
rozumie
Nowakowska,
ten temat tak
she understands this issue just like us, but she would like to contribute to the debate, and she would also like to contribute to the campaign, and we would just like to ask you that you have this Baltic dla pokoleń and Baltic for Generations .com. We would like you to engage in civic activism so that you urge there's an appeal to the European Commission to enact the resolution of the European Parliament which urges the European Union to recover shipwrecks and chemical weapons dating back to World War II. Positive action in which everyone can engage in, and I would like to ask why you, Ms. Ida Nowakowska, has decided to be part of this campaign, and what you believe we should do that we steward the Baltic Sea better.
Firstly, I'd like to thank for the invitation and actively participate in
ponieważ
this
słuchałam aktywnie
discussion.
i zostałam wtajemniczona w
And
pewien
I've
świat, którego nie
been
jestem.
presented
Nie ukrywam,
to a world,
nie
or
wiedziałam
introduced to a
na temat,
world
dopóki,
that I was foreign to
zostałam
before, and
tutaj
before my
właśnie
engagement in this initiative, I did know very little of the matter, so I was deeply impressed
zostało zrobione w tym
with
bardzo ważnym temacie.
what was done in this very important issue. Again, it's not my world, but again, my world is the one that speaks a lot about certain things, and the reception is strong and who speaks does matter. Therefore, I'm happy to be the world of the television or the scene, which allows me to meet such people as you who are engaged in the fundamental matters which affect the functioning of peoples of all ages and walks of life, and how they can sign over very important issues. And this hashtag, which I hope will become very well known, Baltic for Generations, will gain prominence. From the very early childhood, I've been not only involved in the city, the life of the Baltic Sea, but I've recently become a mother, and who is somewhere around here with my mum. So we came here with my entire family because we believe that this is a very important matter, and I wish to be a parent who thinks of the future generation, who is not passive and ignores the needs of the future generations and selfishly thinks only of themselves. I'd love to participate in such events as this one every day, and to get to know such people as you, and then to be able to share this knowledge with my son and perhaps someone else, because hopefully my family will get bigger soon. I know I'm not the only parent in the room, and most of those here are not specialists in their fields, but they're also privately parents. So I hope that this hashtag will have a significant range. And I see cameras, so I know that there are people behind those cameras there. And I know that we're starting this initiative, and I do sign the Baltic for Generations initiative and I do hope that our sea will be safe for the future generations.
Słuchałam.
But I know that it's not the question of security and safety, but the question of environment and health is the proper approach and take on the issue. Thank you for these thumb ups.
Dziękuję. Proszę Państwa, w imieniu organizatorów
Ladies and gentlemen,
dziękuję.
on behalf of the organizers, I'd like to thank
Zgodzili się przyjąć zaproszenie.
all the experts who accepted our invitation. There was quite a lot of us. We've had voices from Poland, we had voices from abroad. It's a common issue that we all can take on, and it's not just building awareness about these shipwrecks and chemical munitions, but all that is related to this matter. So all that can be done to hopefully quickly solve this issue, although we are aware that these actions are massive and a lot has to happen before we happily arrive at the conclusion. So today we've just saw a launch of our initiatives, but our social media profiles, both under the Polish and English hashtag, will present a lot of information on the chemical munitions and cover the activities of various organizations, so to supply sufficient knowledge to Polish and international society. At the end, I'd like to thank the persons without whom we wouldn't be here. First, I'd like to thank the chairman of Enea, Paweł Szczeszek, who understands the notions of socially responsible businesses and sustainable development. And it's very important that we as a company can contribute to this society. I'd like to thank Kamil Wiszkowski from the Global Compact Network Poland from the United Nations, because he was the person who made me aware of this matter 4 years ago, and since then I've been dreaming to involve the Polish public opinion in the matter. I'd like to thank the friends who supported us in organizing our event. It was a quite substantial effort, unfortunately also due to the pandemic situation. I'd like to thank our partners from Sea Communications, Onboard King Kong and Ear Communications, and also the friends at the Corporate Responsibility Bureau. Today it was just the start. Follow us and let's carry on. Thank you very much. And to conclude, thank you, Mr. Director, and thanks to all those who got on board, those who have less knowledge, but nonetheless are very active. And this is definitely a bipartisan issue. And I hope this will allow us to arrive at an international consensus. And with that, we conclude our conference. The Baltic for Generation initiative takes off. And this initiative is a long-term commitment, but also offers unique opportunities for Poland and for the world. And I hope that we are leaving this session enriched with knowledge, and I invite you for a snack in the room behind us. Thank you very much and have a nice afternoon. Goodbye.